Vivienne Vale hit the ice with a crack loud enough to turn a few heads and curse her 6-inch stilettos into oblivion. "Whoa, are you okay?" a deep voice asked above her as she blinked up at a sky too bright for a woman who just landed flat on her back in the middle of Bryant Park. She groaned, humiliated. "That depends. Did anyone get that on video?" A laugh, low, warm, real. A gloved hand appeared in her vision, and when she took it, the man pulled her up with a strength that made her knees wobble more than the fall had. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his breath visible in the frosty air. Vivienne tried to shake off the sting in her tailbone and forced a smile. "Just my ego." And that's when she noticed him. Dark hair, tousled from the wind, hazel eyes with a fleck of gold that made her brain glitch for a second, and a jawline so sharp it could cut through her company's quarterly meetings. He held a small boy's mittened hand with his free one. The kid stared at her with wide eyes and a half-eaten churro. "You fell hard," the little boy said. "Like boom." Vivienne let out a real laugh. "No kidding." "I'm Jonah," the man said, glancing down at his son with a smile. "This is Zach, he's 5, honest to a fault." "I'm Vivienne," she said, brushing snow off her black wool coat. "And I should have called a car or worn boots, or not tried to cross a sheet of ice like I'm in a fashion show." Zach looked up at his dad. "Daddy, she's funny. Can we keep her?" Jonah chuckled, his voice pure warmth. "We don't collect strangers, bud." Vivienne's cheeks flushed, and not from the cold. "Don't worry, I'm not in the market to be collected." Jonah raised an eyebrow, just as a group of tourists skated by, nearly knocking her over again. Without thinking, he caught her arm, steadying her. "Seriously," he said, looking at her shoes, "are those even legal in this weather?" She grinned, brushing a strand of chestnut hair from her face. "Legal? Probably. Practical? Definitely not." "You're lucky you didn't break your neck." "Trust me, I've survived worse. I'm a CEO. Falling in public is just another Monday." His smile tugged wider. "CEO, huh? Of what? An ice skating shoe company." "I know, Vale Cosmetics. Ever heard of it?" Jonah blinked. "You're Vivienne Vale." She tilted her head. "Yeah, you've heard of me." "I've seen your face on bus stops," he said, "and my ex used to swear by your lipstick, something with a weird name like Scarlet Revenge." She laughed again. "Crimson Rain." "Right, that one." Zach tugged at his dad's sleeve. "Can we go to the library now? I want the dinosaur book." "Sure, buddy." Jonah turned to Vivienne. "You gonna be okay?" She nodded. "Thanks to you." "Next time," he said, eyes twinkling, "maybe try snow boots." As they turned to leave, she glanced down at the wet, ruined shoes that had cost more than most people's rent. Still, she smiled. "Wait," she called out. Jonah turned, Zach already bouncing beside him. She pulled a sleek black business card from her coat and handed it to him. "If you ever need a favor, or a discount on lipstick." He looked at the card, then back at her. "You sure?" "Positive." Jonah gave her a short nod. "Then maybe I'll call, for the lipstick or the shoes." And with that, he walked away, disappearing into the crowd, his son hopping alongside him like he had springs in his boots. Vivienne stood there, heart thudding too fast for a woman who'd just fallen on ice and been helped up by a stranger. But Jonah wasn't just anyone. There was something about him, something solid, grounded, like he wasn't fazed by her title or her heels or the fact that she ran a multi-million-dollar company. He hadn't looked at her like she was intimidating. He'd looked at her like she was just a woman who needed help standing. And that hadn't happened in a long time. 3 days later, Vivienne stepped out of her chauffeured black SUV and walked into a cozy bookstore in Brooklyn, where her assistant said Jonah worked part-time on weekends to volunteer for the children's reading program. She didn't know what she was doing there. Correction, she did. She wanted to see him again. The moment she walked in, she spotted him seated near a circle of kids, Zach on his lap, a book in his hand. And then the dinosaur roared so loud, the whole jungle shook. The kids squealed, Zach laughed. Vivienne stood by the doorway, watching the way Jonah read, animated, patient, completely present. She waited until the story ended before approaching. Jonah looked up surprised. Vivienne. Hey, she said, suddenly feeling out of place in her tailored coat and heels again. I was in the area. He raised a brow. In Brooklyn. She shrugged. Okay, I detoured. He stood, Zach grinning up at her. You came to see me, Jonah asked, wiping his hands on his jeans. She hesitated. I wanted to thank you properly. I didn't do much. You helped me up. And you gave me a business card. I figured I'd do one better. There's a new French restaurant opening in Midtown, private chef, ridiculously hard to get into. He stared at her. Are you asking me out? Zach gasped. Are you gonna kiss my dad? Vivienne laughed, cheeks turning red. Only if he says yes. Jonah looked between his son and her. I get off at 6. I'll pick you up at 6:30, she said, smiling. At 6:30 sharp, Vivienne pulled up in a sleek black car with a driver in a suit. Jonah stepped out of the bookstore, wearing a navy button-down and clean slacks, hair still damp from a quick shower. She stepped out of the car, and for a moment, they just stared at each other. You clean up nice, she said. You look like a woman who breaks hearts for breakfast. Only on weekends. He opened the car door for her. And for the record, he said, sliding in beside her, I wasn't expecting this. This. He smiled. You. Vivienne's heart flipped. Neither was I, she whispered. And as the car pulled away from the curb into the glittering city night, she realized something. She hadn't just fallen on ice that day. She'd started falling for him. Vivienne had never been one to get nervous. Not in front of investors, not during product launches, not even when she stood on a stage in front of 20,000 people at the Global Beauty Summit. But as Jonah held the door open to the private dining room of Le Pays Noir, and she stepped into a world of candlelight and string music, her pulse betrayed her confidence. This is not what I expected, Jonah said, looking around at the floral chandeliers and velvet banquettes. It's their soft opening, Vivienne replied, adjusting the strap of her dress. They sent me an invite last week. Figured, why not make it a dinner worth remembering? Jonah followed the maitre d' to their table and pulled out her chair. She noticed how he scanned the room not nervously, but curiously, like he was used to watching others, not being the one under scrutiny. I've never had a meal where the menu didn't have prices, he said as he sat across from her. Vivienne raised an eyebrow. That's the point. I mean, I guess you don't need to worry about that. She didn't flinch. Would it bother you if I paid? He leaned back slightly, studying her. No, but I'd want to earn it. The server arrived with champagne. Jonah waved it off. I'm driving, he said quietly. Vivienne nodded, placing the flute back on the table untouched. So, he said, glancing at the menu, then back at her. How does a woman like you end up falling on her back in a public park? She laughed. I was avoiding a photographer. There's a gossip site that's been stalking me since, turned down a merger with one of their advertisers. You get followed. Sometimes, but I don't mind. They usually get bored when they realize I'm boring. He didn't laugh. You don't seem boring, he said, his voice low. Her throat tightened slightly. And you don't seem like someone who volunteers his weekends. He shrugged. Zach likes the reading program. It gives us something to do outside the apartment. Plus, I used to love books as a kid, still do. She folded her hands. What do you do the rest of the week? I run a small renovation company. Kitchens, bathrooms, the occasional brownstone if I'm lucky. It pays the bills. So you build things. I fix things. The way he said it made her chest ache, unexpectedly. You're not what I expected, she admitted. He smiled, not the practiced kind, the real kind, the one that reached his eyes. Good. Their food arrived in delicate courses. Jonah asked questions, real ones, not about her company or her net worth or how many followers she had. He asked what drew her to makeup, why she never married, what her parents were like. Vivienne hesitated at that last one. My father left when I was 12, she said finally, her voice softer. My mother worked 2 jobs until I got my first grant. She passed before I made anything of myself. Jonah didn't offer pity, just listened. She'd be proud, he said simply. And you, she asked, Zach's mom. She moved to LA. Last year, we were never married. Does Zach miss her? He asks sometimes. Tell him the truth, that she loves him but lives far away. He's smart. He understands more than people give him credit for. Vivienne looked down at her plate. He's lucky to have you. I'm lucky to have him. The music shifted to a slower tempo. A few couples moved to the open space near the piano. Jonah glanced at them. Do you dance? Not well, she said, and definitely not in heels. He stood and held out his hand. Then I'll lead. She hesitated only a second before placing her hand in his. The moment he touched her waist, something shifted. The air between them tightened, not uncomfortable, just undeniable. They swayed slowly, the world outside the room fading to a blur. You know, she said softly, I didn't plan on falling for anyone this year. Had a 5-year strategy. He chuckled. Does that strategy include dancing with a construction guy in a place that doesn't list prices? No, she said, meeting his gaze, but maybe it should have. He didn't kiss her, not yet, but he didn't have to. The way he looked at her he saw all the rough edges she usually kept hidden and didn't want to smooth them out, was more intimate than any kiss could have been. When they left, he walked her to the car and didn't let go of her hand until the driver opened the door. I had a good time, he said. So did I. I don't want to mess this up. Then don't. He leaned in, not for a kiss, but to brush a strand of hair off her cheek. I'll call you, he said. I'll answer. And this time, when she got into the car, she didn't look back, because she didn't need to. She felt it. Something had shifted, not just between them but inside her. And it terrified her in the best possible way. Vivienne adjusted the collar of her slate blue blouse as she stepped into the Vale Cosmetics boardroom, but her mind wasn't on the product pitch waiting for her inside. It was still tangled in the way Jonah's thumb had brushed her cheek the night before and the quiet certainty in his voice when he said he didn't want to mess things up. She sat through the presentation, nodded at the right times, approved a new campaign, and pushed her team harder than usual, but the sharp edge she usually wielded with precision was softened. Blunted, her assistant noticed. So did her head of marketing. She didn't care. By the time she returned to her office, her phone buzzed. Sorry to call during work hours, Jonah's voice came through the line, but I've got a situation. She straightened. What kind of situation? Zach's school just called. He's running a fever. I'm stuck mid-project with a client who's already behind schedule and my sitter's out sick. Vivienne didn't hesitate. I'll come get him. There was a pause. You don't have to do that. I just needed to vent. I want to. You're sure? She was already grabbing her coat. Text me the address. When she arrived at the school, the front desk secretary looked at her like she'd stepped off the cover of a magazine which, technically, she had a few times, but Vivienne didn't falter. She signed the forms, took Zach's hand, and led him to her car. He was flushed, quiet, and clutching a small dinosaur toy in one fist. I don't feel good, he murmured. I know, sweetheart, we're going somewhere nice and quiet. Instead of taking him to her penthouse too sterile, too far, she brought him to her guest suite in the lower level of her building's private concierge floor. It was warm, had a stocked kitchenette, and had once been used to house overseas clients. Now, it was perfect for resting a sick 5-year-old. She tucked him onto the couch, turned on a nature documentary with soft narration, and sat beside him as he curled into her side. You smell like flowers, he mumbled. She smiled. That's probably the perfume I designed last year. Can I have one? Next time you're not sick, I'll give you the whole set. He dozed off against her shoulder, and for the first time in years, Vivienne felt the kind of stillness she'd never allowed herself to want. Not in a life filled with launches, deadlines, and gala fundraisers. 2 hours later, Jonah arrived, his face tight with worry. She met him at the door. He's asleep, she whispered. Temperature's down. I gave him water and some fruit, nothing heavy. Jonah looked past her into the suite, then back at her. You didn't have to do all this. I wanted to. He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. You're something else. Is that a compliment or a warning? He let out a breath of laughter, softer this time. Both. They stood in the doorway for a moment, neither moving. Vivienne tilted her head. Can I ask you something? Of course. Why did you tell me who you really are? His brow furrowed. What do you mean? She stepped back, picked up a magazine from her coffee table, and held it out. The headline read, The Billionaire Who Vanished Jonah Hale's Disappearance After Hale Corp's Collapse. You dropped your last name, she said, but I know those eyes. I remember your face. You were in every financial publication 5 years ago when your father's company went under. Jonah's shoulders went rigid. I wasn't hiding, he said. I just walked away. I didn't want Zach growing up in that world. Vivienne kept her voice even. You're not broke. No. You never were a small-time contractor. I am now, by choice. She set the magazine down. That's why you didn't blink twice at the restaurant, or the car, or me picking up the tab. I didn't want to make this about money, not with you. Why? Because that's what it's always been about, he said, voice low. My entire life. My father cared more about stock prices than his own family. I didn't want to repeat that, so I left, sold everything I inherited, started over. I wanted Zach to know what it meant to earn things, not expect them. Vivienne nodded slowly. Understand that, but you should have told me. I wanted to, but I didn't know if you'd see me differently. I do, she said carefully, but not in the way you think. He searched her face. Then how? You didn't run from failure. You walked away from everything easy. That's not weakness, that's strength. Jonah stepped forward. Haven't felt this way about anyone in a long time. Vivienne's chest ached in a way she didn't recognize. Me neither. He looked toward the suite where Zach was still sleeping. Can't give you a life of private jets and celebrity galas. She took a step closer. Good, I already have that. I don't need more of it. I don't know how to do this, he admitted. This thing between us. I don't either, she said, voice quieter now, but I want to try. Jonah reached for her hand, lacing their fingers together with a grip that said everything he couldn't. The silence between them stretched, not awkward, just full. Then he leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't tentative, it wasn't rushed. It was the kind of kiss that rewrote the room. That told a woman who had built an empire on being untouchable that maybe, just maybe, she didn't want to be anymore. When they pulled apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "I'm going to take Zach home," he said, "but I want to see you again, not in a restaurant, not in a suit, just you." Vivienne nodded. "Come find me when you're ready." He gave her hand one last squeeze, then disappeared down the hallway. She stood there alone in the silence, lips still tingling from the kiss, heart thrumming like it didn't quite know what to do with itself. Vivienne Vale, the woman who had never needed anyone, had just let someone in. And she didn't regret it for a second. The first snow of December came soft and steady, blanketing the city in a hush that made even Fifth Avenue feel quiet. Vivienne stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of her penthouse, holding a cup of black tea that had long gone cold, watching the flakes drift down like confetti from the sky. She hadn't heard from Jonah in 4 days. Not silence in the cold shoulder sense. He had sent word through his assistant to politely decline an invitation to a foundation gala she'd extended. He'd had to reschedule a museum visit she'd planned with him and Zach. Each time it was kind, respectful, but distant. Her phone buzzed on the marble ledge beside her. A message from her driver, confirming he'd brought the package to Jonah's apartment just as she asked. She hadn't sent anything extravagant, just a simple children's book. The same one Jonah had read aloud to the kids at the bookstore the first time she saw him. Inside the cover, she'd written 2 words in her looping script. "Remember this." The next morning, the knock on her office door was unexpected. She looked up from a stack of campaign proofs, and her breath caught. Jonah stood there, coat dusted with snow, a canvas tote on one shoulder and Zach asleep in his arms. "I didn't want to wait," he said, his voice rough with something she hadn't heard from him before. "Can I come in?" She stood slowly, nodded once, and led him to her private lounge just off the office. The plush couch there had never looked more functional. He eased Zach down gently, tucking a puffy jacket under his head before straightening and facing her. "I read the book," he said. She folded her arms. "I figured you would." "I forgot how much I loved it, how it made me feel like everything good was still possible." Vivienne didn't speak. She waited. "I've been scared," he admitted. "Not of you, of how much I care, how fast it happened. I've built a life with limits, boundaries. I've kept things small so I wouldn't lose control again." She stepped closer. "I'm not here to control anything, Jonah." "I know," his gaze dropped. "That's what makes it harder. You don't need me, you don't need anyone, but you still chose me, and that terrifies me." Vivienne reached up, touching the lapel of his coat lightly. "I used to think needing someone was a weakness, but then you carried my son when he was sick. You made him laugh when he was scared. You held me like I wasn't breakable, even when I was." Jonah's jaw tightened. "The night I kissed you, I didn't want to leave, but I knew if I stayed, I'd fall too hard, and I didn't know if I could risk that again." She let her hand fall to her side. "You already did, so did I." He looked at her like he was seeing her through a lens that had finally come into focus. "I love you." She drew in a breath as the words settled into the space between them. Not dramatic, not whispered, just true. She stepped forward and placed her hand against his chest. "I love you too." His arms came around her like they'd always belonged there. And when he kissed her again, it wasn't searching or tentative. It was certain, earned. The door creaked slightly behind them, and they pulled apart just as Zach stirred and sat up, blinking sleep from his eyes. "Are we in your work?" he asked, looking around. She smiled. "Yes, kiddo, you're in the big boss's office." Jonah crouched beside him. "You hungry?" Zach nodded. "Can we get pancakes?" Vivienne looked at both of them. I know a place, best pancakes in the city, private room, no wait. Zach grinned. Do they have whipped cream? I can make sure they do. Jonah stood slowly, watching her with something deeper than gratitude, something rooted. We're a lot to take on, he said quietly. She reached for her coat. You're exactly what I want. They left her office hand in hand, with Zach skipping ahead in his oversized boots, still half asleep but already dreaming of breakfast. Later that afternoon, Jonah brought her to a quiet brownstone in a tree-lined Brooklyn street. He opened the front door and stepped aside. I've been working on this for months, he said. It was supposed to be a project for resale, but now. Vivienne stepped inside and took in the polished oak floors, the light-filled kitchen, the sunroom in the back with a window seat and built-in bookshelves. You built this, she asked. He nodded. Every tile, every beam. I wanted something that felt like home, just didn't know who it was for until now. She turned slowly in the living room, heart thudding. Are you saying? I want a life with you, not just dinners and stolen weekends. I want mornings and school drop-offs. I want the hard days, too, if you're still willing. She walked to him, lifted his hand, and placed it over her heart. This is yours, she said, if you still want it. He kissed her again, right there in the middle of the room he had built from nothing, with the snow falling outside and a future unfolding between them like a promise. 6 weeks later, they hosted a quiet wedding in the sunroom. Only 20 guests. No press. Just her closest team, his bookstore friends, and a sleepy Zach who insisted on walking her down the aisle and handing her a white rose instead of a ring. Vivienne wore a simple silk gown, no veil, no diamonds. Jonah wore a dark suit with a trace of sawdust still on the cuff. As they exchanged vows, she didn't think about her empire. She didn't think about the headlines she used to chase or the spotlight she used to hide behind. She thought of the man who helped her up when she fell, the boy who curled against her side when he was sick, the life she'd never planned for but couldn't imagine living without. When they kissed, the room erupted in applause, but Vivienne only heard his heartbeat as he held her close. Not because she needed saving, not because she needed anything, but because she'd finally found the one thing she never knew she'd been building toward all along. A life that was real. And love that didn't ask her to fall. It caught her when she did. The scent of fresh paint and jasmine-scented candles lingered in the air as Vivienne stepped into the sunroom of their restored brownstone, her heels clicking softly against the newly polished floor. Late afternoon light spilled through the tall windows, casting golden shadows across the bookshelves and the ivory drapes fluttering in the gentle breeze. She carried a leather-bound planner under one arm, but her thoughts were far from business. The final shipment from her office was due to arrive that evening, the last traces of her former penthouse life. She hadn't hesitated when she made the decision to sell it. The moment she'd married Jonah, she'd known exactly where home was. Are you sure about giving up the penthouse? Jonah asked from the doorway, leaning against the frame with a soft expression that had become as familiar to her as her own reflection. I know how much it meant to you. She looked over her shoulder at him, her voice steady. It meant something to the woman I used to be, not the one standing here. He walked to her, his hands brushing against her hips as he pulled her close. I still can't believe you said yes to me. I didn't just say yes, she said, resting her forehead against his. I choose you every day. Zach's laughter floated in from the backyard, where he was chasing a kite across the small patch of lawn they'd cleared. The sight filled Vivienne's chest with a fullness she could still barely comprehend. He's happier here, Jonah said, watching his son through the glass. More grounded, he never used to ask to play outside like this. That's because here, she said, he doesn't feel like he's visiting someone else's life. This is his. Jonah kissed her temple, then pulled back slightly. I've been thinking about something. Is it another surprise home renovation? Because I'm still recovering from the pantry transformation. He laughed, then shook his head. Something else. I want to expand the business, not just renovations anymore. Design, staging, even custom builds. I've got clients asking, and I have the capital to do it now. You should, she said immediately. You've built something real, you've earned this. I want it to be ours, he said. Not just mine. You have an eye for detail most designers dream of. You've built a brand from nothing. I want your name on the door beside mine. She blinked, surprised. You want to go into business with me? I want our lives to overlap in every way. We're already building it together. Might as well make it official. Vivienne hesitated, not because she doubted him, but because for the first time, she wasn't sure she needed to keep the worlds of love and work separate. She'd spent years guarding her empire like a fortress, but Jonah wasn't a threat to it. He was the one person who'd never asked her to prove she belonged at the top. All right, she said finally, but if we do this, we do it right. Contracts, branding, a new website, everything. He smiled, wide and genuine. Wouldn't expect anything less. That evening, they sat on the back porch with Zach curled between them, his head on Jonah's lap and his feet resting against Vivienne's side. The stars blinked into view slowly, one by one, as the city hummed softly in the distance. I like it here, Zach mumbled, half asleep. It's quiet. Vivienne brushed a hand through his hair. Me too. Jonah looked over at her. Do you miss it? The events, the cameras, the spotlight. She thought about it for a long moment, then shook her head. I thought I would, but what I had before was noise. This, she gestured toward the house, the yard, the boy sleeping between them, this is peace. He reached for her hand, threading their fingers together. I never thought I'd find this again. After losing everything, I thought that was it. Just work, raise Zach, survive. You didn't just survive, she said softly. You rebuilt. You chose to live with purpose. That's what made me fall in love with you. He looked at her like he was memorizing her all over again. I'm still falling. A week later, they hosted a dinner for close friends to celebrate the launch of their new venture Vale and Hale Design Plus Build. The nameplate with their initials was already mounted on the office door of a small but elegant studio space in Carroll Gardens. It had exposed brick, high ceilings, and light that poured in like honey at noon. As guests lingered in the yard under strings of soft lights, sipping wine and laughing over stories, Vivienne stood at the edge of the crowd, watching Jonah help Zach tie his shoelaces for the third time. Ree, her longtime assistant and now business liaison, came to stand beside her. You look different, she said. Lighter. I feel different, Vivienne replied, like I've finally stopped running. You were never running, Ree said. You were waiting for the right things to catch up to you. Zach ran up to her then, tugging her hand. Come see the cake. It has a house on it, like the one Daddy built. She followed him to the table, where a 3-tiered cake stood proudly, complete with fondant blueprints and a tiny brownstone replica on top. Jonah was already there, holding 2 silver forks. For the record, he said, handing her one, I had nothing to do with this level of detail. That's all Zach. Clearly he takes after me. They laughed, and as the first slice was passed around, the night softened into memory. Much later, after the last guest had gone and Zach was tucked into bed, Vivienne stood in the middle of their shared bedroom, brushing her hair out slowly. Jonah came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. You ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't been in the park that day? All the time, she said, and every time I'm grateful I wore those ridiculous heels. He kissed the curve of her neck, then whispered against her skin, I'm going to love you for the rest of my life. She turned to face him, her voice low and certain. Good, because I'm not going anywhere. They lay in bed that night, tangled in soft sheets and each other, the steady rhythm of their breathing in perfect sync. No more headlines, no more masks, just them. A woman who had climbed to the top, and a man who had walked away from it, finding home in the one place neither of them expected. Each other. And in the quiet, in the stillness of their shared life, love didn't roar. It stayed. Steady, fierce, unshakable.